Hello, everybody. Welcome to the GM Sports Report, your weekly podcast on all things sports where every play counts. I'm Grant, and I'm here with my co-host Mason as we get ready to cover the latest news, headlines, and upcoming events going on in the sports world. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to see all things GM Sports Report. Mason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, Grant. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. We're about to shoot episode 50, coming up on a year here in a couple of weeks. It's flown by. I can't believe we're already
Yeah,
heading towards our second NFL season and stuff like that. So
it's
excited to get
crazy.
into this episode. And we'll start that out like how we start out every other episode, and that is with our hot take of the week. So Mason, what is your hot take this week?
So I wasn't going to originally say this, but then after what I've seen on social media and what some people have been saying, if you watched last week, I got on the media and fans and critics for the Shador Glaze. This week, I have to do it for Jackson Dart. It's just he's had an amazing preseason production, and I'm very excited for this guy as a fan. Uh, but we cannot be comparing him to Mahomes and Josh Allen. Two guys who have won MVPs, who've made it far in the playoffs, and have solidified themselves as some of the best quarterbacks in the league. And for a guy like Jackson Dart to play two preseason games and do well at those against, he's playing second team reps, but the guys he's playing against are also second teamers or, not starters, So for him to put up the numbers that he's putting up, it's great. And it gets me very excited as a fan, but we can't be blowing this out of proportion. At the end of the day, he's not going to start. Russell Wilson is the starter. I don't anticipate him coming in any sooner than halfway if it gets that bad. Again, I'm giving Dart his credit, and I'm very excited for his future. But we have to calm down on the comparisons and the hype. Um, it's just a little much. You can't be comparing anyone to Mahomes or Allen. And I was even seeing some Hurts. He's a combination of Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. What are we doing? Calm down. We don't know anything yet. So yeah, just the media is horrible. We got to calm down on everything like that. So yeah, that's my hot take.
Yeah, I gotta applaud you there for putting your bias to the side there and pointed it out. That's a big step for you. I know, as
Yeah,
you really love
yeah.
your New York sports teams, but you're absolutely right. I did see some of these comparisons getting thrown out there again, and I just want to start by saying this: yes, Shador and Jackson Dart have both looked really good from what we've seen so far. And I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm not saying they're a terrible player.
We
I'm
have to
not
stress
hating
that.
on
We have
them.
to stress it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't stress that enough. Um, but these comparisons, when they haven't played in real NFL games yet, are just a little out of hand, I feel like, and it's just for
Mm-hmm.
clicks that the media is doing here. And I think that they need to just, pump the brakes a little bit. Let's see them play in the regular season first before we start making these wild comparisons. Now, like I said, Jackson Dart specifically has looked really good, and Shador has also looked good from what we've seen from him. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think we need the media needs to just take a breath a little bit and relax.
Mm-hmm.
All right, for my hot take, I'm sliding over to MLB. For those of you who don't know, Rob Manfred made an interesting point about how
Mm-hmm.
he was thinking about the idea of making these new divisions to where it fits more for travel purposes. You've got the divisions are teams that are around that area, so to speak, so it's going to make things easier on travel and things like that, but it would essentially get rid of the American League and National League as we know it. My hot take about this matter is that I actually kind of like the idea. I think it's a work in progress. I think it needs a lot of things worked out before we, are all in on this idea. But I think it would create some interesting divisions. Specifically, we looked at the New York Yankees one and we were talking about that, where it would be the Yankees, the Mets, Red Sox, and Phillies. I mean, that would, like you said, this would be the most toxic division in all of sports. That would be just a crazy division to watch unfold as the season goes. The Cubs is another one that would be interesting. It would be the Cubs, White Sox, so you'd have that crosstown series in the same division. And the Brewers, who have been the biggest rival of the Cubs over the
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
decade. And then, you got the Minnesota Twins in there, who are a pretty good team, who would always be in the mix in that division. And it's like that throughout a lot of these divisions because a lot of it will be teams that are close together. So it will be a lot of those crosstown series and things like that. Now, I do have some cons about it. One of them being that all of the American League and National League stats in the past and
Mm-hmm.
records in the stats would just be gone because there would be no more AL and NL records and stuff like that. It would be a whole new record book from then started on. And then another complaint being you would never be able to see a World Series like a crosstown series between the Cubs and White Sox. You would never be able to see a Subway
Mm-hmm.
series between the Yankees and Mets.
Yeah.
So that also is a negative in my eyes. I think it could use some working out, but I do think it's an interesting idea just to be thrown out there. But we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I wasn't too sure when I first saw the post that that's what the actual commissioner of the MLB said that he was thinking of doing. So I saw that I was like, oh, okay, it's just some fanfics, nothing crazy. But for him to actually say that, I love it. It feels weird watching a sport and not having Philly in our division so I can hate on them as much as I can. I feel like I need that. And the Mets, they're right there too. Over time, I've definitely not liked them as much. And, Red Sox, they have to be in there. So, it's just, I really like it. I really like the layout. And I feel like the cons could be, a pretty big thing. But when you look at the NFL when they merged, they all just made it into one big, NFL record book. So I don't know if that's something that they would look into doing, to where the AL and the NL records aren't just as much of a feat anymore. But I really do like the idea, but all the kinks would have to be worked out. And yeah, we'll see how serious they take it.
Yeah, and then just one other thing to keep in consideration when you think of like that division specifically, where it's the Yankees, Phillies, Red Sox,
Mm-hmm.
Mets, those are all powerhouse teams right now that are like competing for World
Yeah,
Series right now. And then you look
yeah,
at probably a different division that'll be in here. I haven't looked through the specifics of every single division, but I'm
same.
sure there's another division out there where it's teams that are going to be multiple teams that aren't competing for a World Series, and it'll be a terrible division. So it's just another thing to
Yep,
keep thinking about. And it's an interesting thought for sure, but it definitely has some
absolutely.
ironing out that it needs. But yeah, we'll see.
Yep.
All right. Next thing we're going to do is talk about our underdogs of the week. So, Mason, I'll let you go ahead and begin. Who is your underdog of the week?
Yeah, so my underdog of the week, I think I mentioned him last week. I'm not too sure if I did. But it's the Broncos backup quarterback Jarrett Stidham. In the preseason, he's had 376 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 80% completion percentage. He has by far been looking like the best quarterback in preseason. And again, you don't hear his name being thrown around at all. You see Dylan Gabriel's name being thrown out more just because he's related to Shador in that quarterback room. So yeah, I just want to give him his flowers. And yeah, he had a great performance in the preseason so far.
Yeah, I like it. Shout out Jared Stidham. He's looked sharp. Like you said, I haven't watched any of his games personally, but
Mm-hmm.
those stats sound good. So I like it. My underdog of the week, I'm going with the team that walked off against the Dodgers last night to expand their winning streak to 4 games. And that is the ultimate underdog. The Colorado Rockies are the team that did that.
Mm,
And, the Rockies, we probably never talk about them on here just because they're never in the mix. So
no.
I thought it'd be fitting to throw them in the underdog of the week segment to give them a little shout out.
Yep.
Walk off against the Dodgers, that's a pretty impressive feat. And like I said, 4 game winning streak. So they got some momentum going. Not that it really matters, but they got some fun young talent on that team. And who knows
Mm-hmm.
what they'll be like in the future. We'll just have to see. So the Colorado Rockies are my underdog of the week.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, next thing we're going to get into is the MLB, and we're just going to do our 2 segments that we normally do for the MLB. That is our player of the week and team of the week. So Mason, I'll let you go ahead and begin with your player of the week.
Yeah, mine is Zach Neto, AL Player of the Week. Been batting 320 of the past week, 4 home runs and 8 ribbies. So he's been looking pretty good. So he is my Player of the Week.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot. I had talked about Zach Neto last week when he had that
Mm-hmm.
walk off against the Dodgers, ironically enough, in the Freeway Series, and I think they actually ended up winning that series. And he was probably a big part of that. Zach Neto's been probably the biggest headline for the Angels this year. He's been really solid
Yep.
all year round, and having a hot week. So I like that pick. For my player of the week, I'm going with Francisco Lindor, who was coming off a very bad slump, one of the worst slumps in his career. And boy, has he turned it around. He's gone 14 for 25 with 3 home runs, 7 RBIs, and a 1647 OPS. So he's been absolutely smashing the baseball and has looked more like himself as of late. Like I said, he was struggling pretty bad for a while there and has clearly broken out of it recently, which is huge for the Mets as they're fighting for that wild card spot. And we'll see
Mm-hmm.
how the Mets move forward.
Yep.
All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get into our team of the week. So who's your team?
Yeah, my team of the week is the KC Royals. 4-game winning streak, 3.5 games back from a wild card spot. I think the Guardians are right in front of them. So I think they're 3 games back. And, Vinny Pasquantino and Salvador Perez they've both been having decent seasons, both over 20 home runs. And then Bobby Witt's been playing good as well. I wouldn't say he's been playing as good as, some previous seasons. He's been hitting, I think it's been more contact. He's at 140 hits on the year with a 291 batting average. So, they got the guys there and they're producing, but definitely not what they were seasons prior.
Yeah, I like that pick. Coming into this year, I thought the Royals were going to have a decent shot at their division, and it really
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been the case. They started out really slow, and they've been battling with some injuries and stuff like that. So it will be interesting to see as we're kind of towards the final stretch of the regular season if they'll be able to make some noise. I'm a huge Bobby Witt fan, and obviously he hasn't been having as big of a year as that MVP caliber season he had last year,
Mm-hmm.
but still playing a big part to this team. And it'll be interesting to see what they do down the stretch. Obviously, Vinny Pasquantino, like you said, having a huge year. And
Yep.
they did lose, what's his name? I'm blanking. Right, Chris Bubich, who is a huge player for them, an
Yeah.
all-star.
Yep.
So that might hurt them, but they still got some pretty good starters in that rotation. So we'll just have to see. I like that pick. My team of the week, you're going to like this. I'm going with the New York Yankees. This was a team that was
I couldn't
free
pick them.
falling for a long stretch. They were free falling, and it seems like they've snapped out of that. They're 7-3 in their last 10, and boy, did they need to start turning it on because obviously the Red Sox were catching up to them. I still think they're pretty close to them,
Yes.
and they
Yep.
are still 5 games back from first place in the AL East, but with them getting out of this little rut they've been in, who knows what can happen? They can get hot. I think a big part of that is Aaron Judge coming back, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see what the Yankees have in store for the final stretch of this season.
Yep. Got Tampa tonight and tomorrow, so hopefully we can, open it up a little more.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and get into the NFL. Like last week, we did 3 takeaways for the first week of preseason. And this week, we're going to do 3 more takeaways from this previous week of preseason. So, Mason, what are your 3 takeaways?
Yeah, so my first takeaway, I know I've been talking about this team a lot, but it's also been, I think, the team with the most drama and the most headlines, and that is the Cleveland Browns. Joe Flacco will be named starter quarterback. I'm honestly not too surprised. Kenny Pickett is still injured. I think he won't be in until, I think if he was healthy, he would be the starter, but like I said, with the injury. And I think my ultimate opinion, I think 4 or 5 weeks in, maybe even 3 weeks into the regular season, there will be some significant quarterback movement. I'm not too sure exactly what that will be, but I think that there will be some movement going on. And then my second takeaway is Stetson Bennett. He gets the win for the Rams with a score of 23-22 against the Chargers. And this is something that surprised me. He was the only quarterback to play all game for the Rams. It's very rare to see in the preseason, but he did throw the ball a lot. He went 28 for 40, 324 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. So we didn't see too much from him last year, but from what we see so far in the preseason, it's been decent. And then my third takeaway, I think, is going to be the biggest takeaway of the preseason, in my opinion, and that is the Bengals' offensive line is already shown to be a major concern for the Bengals team. The line literally had Joe Burrow scrambling 20 yards behind the line of scrimmage just for him to buy enough time to even, hope to get a throw off. And then he'd ultimately get sacked. And we saw that a couple times last night. Everyone has MVP expectations for Joe Burrow, But the only thing that is in his way is his own team, whether that be his offensive line or his defensive struggles like last year. So I'm really hoping that they can kind of turn it on in the regular season. I love the Bengals. I like watching them. They're a very exciting team. And I like Joe Burrow as a quarterback a lot. I would love to see him get an MVP, but the cards are kind of stacked against him with his own team, and that's credit to the Bengals, general management. So paying for receivers rather than offensive linemen and focusing on the contracts on the defensive side, just not putting their money where it needs to be put. So I think they could really struggle this season if those requirements don't get fixed.
Yeah, I like all three of those takeaways. And something I'm pleased to talk about is that all three of my takeaways aren't copying yours. So we finally have
Okay.
6 full different points that we can talk about. But yeah, I like all three of your
Nice.
takeaways. Specifically, the Joe Flacco one, I found that one very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Obviously, I expected that as well. But I am interested to see because, like you said, I think it will change pretty soon going into the season, like within 3 weeks, and it'll be interesting to see whose name gets called in that situation when it does happen. So, definitely
Yep.
something to keep an eye on. All right, my 3 takeaways. Starting out with my first one, Cam Ward's looked a little shaky so far. This last week, he
Mm-hmm.
went 2 for 7 for 42 yards. This was just after he said that he believes he has a top 5 receiver core in the league, which I thought was a little crazy of a statement to make. Look, I like the confidence and everything, but you got to back it up too. He's
Yeah.
looked a little shaky. I'm a huge Cam Ward guy. I watched a lot of his last season with University of Miami last year and was a big fan of his. So it'll be interesting to see if he can turn it around. But yeah, he's looked shaky so far. My
Mm-hmm.
second takeaway is that Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson looks like it could potentially be a match made in heaven. This is the first time we've gotten to see Caleb Williams. Was this last week of preseason? He went for only a little bit, but 6 for 10 for 107 yards and a touchdown. And that Bears team looked
Yeah.
pretty good in that preseason game. They look different from years past, and I think a lot of that comes from Ben Johnson. I mean, everyone has been talking about the Ben Johnson sign in and how excited they are for him, and how Caleb Williams can fit into his system. And so far, it looks pretty good. And I'm not saying it is going to be a match made in heaven because, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, we haven't seen a regular season game yet. But I'm saying it has potential to be a really good connection between those two guys. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. My third
Yep.
takeaway is despite the Brian Robinson Jr. Talks of him being traded potentially, the rookies in their last preseason game, Chris Rodriguez
Mm-hmm.
and Bill Krosky Merritt, combined for 108 yards and a touchdown, so they looked really solid. And I feel like maybe a part of the reason why they're okay with trading Brian Robinson Jr. is because they have those two guys in their running back room now and feel more comfortable
Yep.
moving on from Brian Robinson. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. What Washington does. That's now their second player on the trade block on their team. That was a pretty
Yep.
big part of their offense, obviously, with Terry McLaurin, that whole situation going on. So they got some figuring out to do. But with that being said, their run game looked pretty good last night with Bill Krosky Merritt and Chris Rodriguez.
Yeah. I'm really glad you. I'll first touch up on the Commanders because I was watching the game last night, and I'd look up and then I'd see like a 20 or 30 yard run, and I'd be like, "Who is this guy?" And
Yeah.
you hear all the speculation of Brian Robinson, and then it's like, oh, "Okay, cool. They might be okay." And the fact that it's two running backs who are really proving themselves and hopefully get a roster spot to be able to show what they can do in the regular season if Robinson Jr. is traded. I think that's a great showing for the rookies and the Washington that they can figure it out. And then the Ben Johnson on the Bears, I really like that you shouted that out as well because I think Ben Johnson was one of the biggest factors for that Detroit success last year. Granted, they didn't make it far in the playoffs, but in the regular season, you saw some of those offensive play calls that just work magically. And I think Caleb Williams has it in his bag to be able to be great, and he just needs a little bit of a push of a coach of who knows what he's doing. Nagy last year, absolutely awful. Some of the worst play calls I've ever seen in my life, and just decisions in general. Um, and yeah, I think it'll be very different for them this year. I'm not expecting a lot, but I'm expecting more from them. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm really
I
glad you
agree.
shouted them out.
Yeah. I agree. I'm the Bears are actually one of the teams I'm most interested in seeing play this year, just to
Hmm.
see what they look like. I think that they have a chance to make a big leap from what they were last season. So, yeah, it'll be
Absolutely.
interesting to see how that plays out. And getting closer to the NFL season, so getting more and more excited to talk about it. And
Hmm.
as the weeks go, we'll obviously do what we did last year, which was our first ever episode, which was our NFL season preview. We're going to be doing that
Last
again.
year.
So, looking forward to do that.
Last
I know it's
year.
crazy. Whole year.
That's crazy. Yeah, I know.
All right, finally, we're gonna slide over to UFC. Kamzat versus DDP went down last weekend, I should say. Um,
Hmm.
I honestly didn't watch any of the fight, but I did see some of the highlights and stuff like that in the stats. But we'll go ahead and give it a little bit of a discussion and a reaction. So, Mason, what was your reaction to the Kamzat versus DDP fight?
As far as the outcome, I had expected nothing less as far as comes out winning. I heard that it was one of the most dominating fights as far as just possession time, or I'd say whatever they call it. But yeah, for him to the control time, sorry, uh, for him to be pretty much in control for 20 minutes, I think it was, and DDP really not being able to do much. I did expect a lot more, I think, strikes to be thrown, and for Kamzat, I thought he was going to drop him and knock him out, but you know, you get the win when you need it, and we'll see if that's just how his fight style is going to be. But I think it was a great win for Kamzat, and I'm glad DDP does not have a belt anymore. So yeah, those are my reactions.
Yeah, I think DDP got a taste of his own medicine because the last few fights for DDP, he's just spammed what he's needed to do to win a fight, and that's exactly what Kamzat did to him. Just absolutely dog walked him on a leash the whole fight, like you said,
Hmm.
21 minutes of control time or something crazy like that. Um, and I think Kamzat is one of the most dominant fighters in the whole UFC. When he needs to strike, he does, and obviously we see he can grapple and wrestle and control you. So he's a very sharp fighter, and I was expecting him to win this fight. I also thought it would come via knockout, but he did what he needed to do to win. I know a lot of people get bored with fights like that where it's just grappling and control time the whole time, but it's kind of similar to what Marab was doing in his last couple fights. Some of these
Hmm.
fighters just do what they're best at and what they need to do to win, and that's pretty much
It's
it.
part of the
It'll be
sport.
interesting to see what.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to see what's next for Kamzat in his future. Like I said, I think he's a very dominant fighter when he's healthy. Obviously, he's had a lot of the health issues going on.
Hmm.
So we'll see what's next for him. But I don't have too much to say just because I didn't watch any of the fight live. I just kind of saw bits and pieces. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say on it.
Nice.
All right. So that'll pretty much be it for this episode. A little bit shorter, but we feel like the points we covered were important and well thought out. So thank you guys for tuning into this week's episode of GM Sports Report, where every play counts. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to be able to see our weekly episodes on all things sports. For additional content, check the description to see links to our Instagram and TikTok account. This is Grant and Mason. Sign off for now. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, guys.